I think we can get started. So good evening,
Yes.
everybody. Hope all of y'all are doing fine. We'll get started. We are live on Facebook, and this conversation is getting recorded as an information to all of you. So, Madhura, would you want to take?
Yes, Smita. Sure. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the session put together by ILA and Kelpachar. We have been doing this very interesting and exciting session series on the POSH law. And today we are here to discuss the very important topic of cyber security and cyber laws in India as far as POSH is concerned. Myself, Madhura, I'll quickly introduce ILA. Indian Lawyers Association is an organization that works for the betterment of legal professionals by way of giving them a platform for networking, continuing professional education. Young lawyers come to us for guidance, mentoring, and different kinds of initiatives that we undertake. We have about 75 chapters all over India which contribute to the vision and mission of ILA. We'll be very happy to send a brief email to all of you tomorrow and inviting all of you to join the cause. And I hand over to Smita, who is the moderator for the session. Over to you, Smita.
Thank you so much. This is about Kelpechar. My name is Smita, and I'm the CEO and co-founder at Kelpechar. So we started this company in 2013, exactly when the year the law came by. So we are continuously working towards providing safe, happy, and inclusive workplace. And with ILA, the idea is to give back to the society, bring in some eminent speakers, as you see today we have, and I will be introducing them in a bit. Pick their brains, understand more, learn more, and grow. So that's the idea of this. Every month, second Thursdays, we conduct this session. So I'm going to introduce my panel members. Here they are. I have two women and one gentleman on the call today. So a little bit about them. First, I start with Aishwarya, the youngest on the team today. So Aishwarya is a millennial. She started her career in 2020. So she is an associate with IC Universal Legal. So she works in mergers and acquisitions. Aishwarya joined this company in October 2020 and predominantly works in corporate and transactional team. And she's involved in due diligence and advising clients with regulatory compliances. She's a national level table tennis player during her schooling days. That is one of I was discussing with the panel members and saying that while the first part is okay, the second part I really like to speak about Aishwarya. She went on to become a member and subsequently convener on sports committee and was responsible for promoting sports culture at the university and assuring in a host of sport facilities in the campus. She's a voracious reader, learning towards fiction, astrophysics, metaphysics, Indian mythology, religion, and philosophy. She's also a self-proclaimed Potterhead and occasionally likes to indulge in theatre. She is caught up in the pages of novel while she's whisking cake batter and tempering chocolate. And she also dabbles with paints on canvas. She plays sarod and also likes to go for a quick swim. So that is about our millennial on the board today. This gentleman on the board is Rajkumar Srivastav. He's the partner with SK Vestigan LLP and advisor to Protivity Consulting Firm. He's a former law enforcement officer, and that's the reason why I think in today's conversation, he's going to bring in all the experience during his tenure as a law enforcement officer. He's a certified fraud examiner and science and law graduate. He's considered to be one of the expert speakers on POSH, and he's external member on around 8 committees across India. He's imparted POSH trainings for 3,000 employees across senior managements, ICs, HR heads, legal folks, compliance teams, law enforcement officer across. He has around 31 years of fraud investigation experience. So the most important part is Rajkumar was decorated with the Director General of Police insignia for meritorious service. He's a recipient of 140 rewards. and commendatory notes and letters of appreciation, right? That's Rajkumar Srivastava for you. And the most important, while all of them are very important, and Rajkumar and we were discussing prior to the conversation, that Vaishali, who's our third panel member, has been doing work in the space of cyber law much before 2013 law came in, or we got to know about cyber law as such. Okay, so she's an advocate amongst the first technology lawyers in the country with prior qualification and work experience in the field of computer science, cyber defense, and information assurance. She earned a degree in computer science from Pune University, a postgraduate certification in cybersecurity and information assurance from Cranfield University, with an experience over 20 plus years of experience as a practicing lawyer. She heads 50-year-old service law started by her father, VP Shintre Advocate. So Vaishali is a practicing civil and cyber law, and her work includes litigation support and non-litigation and advisory practice. So she practices in civil courts, district court, Bombay High Court, tribunals such as NCLT, DRT, TD, SAT, and adjudicating officer cyber. Her work also focuses on violence against women and children in cyberspace. I can go on explaining, detailing about her and all the other panel members. So I'll take a pause because that will go on and on. So coming back directly to our subject today, okay, what is cyber? Cyber is anything to do with information technology, right? So cyber law, is it important? Yes. Considering today's scenario, we are all online. Right now, the session that we are doing is again, everything online. So we are subjected to a lot of risk. A simple post by any one of you telling them about your current situation, like for example, you've gone on a holiday or you are at a friend's house for a party. You're exposing details about you, where are you, what are you doing, what time you'll be back, who all are there at your home. Everything is out there on social media. Anybody or everybody can have access to it. How much are you protected? It is a very, very scary scene. I remember some day back, I was looking for a recipe, okay, of some food item I wanted to look at. And then I see so many ads about that particular food being sent to me. So I'm being watched at, I'm being looked at. Simple things like, even if I'm not using camera, I'm not sure if somebody's not seeing me. So it is a very scary world. And that is why it was important for us to look at it. Another big reason why we wanted to look at it is because last month we did work on laws which impact women. And we were touching upon on many laws. One of them was cyber law. And a lot of participants came back and said that, we want you to break this up because I don't think you paid attention to all of it. All of it did not get due attention. So when we did a survey to find out which is that law that you want to know first, 60% of them said cyber law. So we said it is very important, looks like need of the hour. So I'm opening up the discussion right now, and Vaishali, I come straight to you. If you have to define cyber law in India, or if you have to define, what will be those first things that comes to your mind?
Mita, if we had this subject going on 20 years before, which means when the law came in 2000, then it was a valid question in terms of what is cyber law. Today, when our existence, we no longer know how much is real and how much is virtual, and there's so much of overlap, and there is almost a parallel existence for all of us online. Any law is actually now cyber law. Any law that deals with how you behave anywhere in the real world, in the virtual world, in the augmented reality world, wherever you are, the law is going to follow you. So that is cyber law for you. And that is why I said in 2000, the Information Technology Act got enacted in 2000. At that time, it was new. Technology was new to most of the people. Adaptation of technology was So then we could classify crimes as where the computer is a source and where a computer is a tool. So there were two very specific bifurcations as to how even cyber crimes were looked at. Some crimes which are traditional in nature, which have been defined under the Indian Penal Code, now if committed with the use of technology, then that is a cybercrime, was one way of defining cybercrime. The other way of defining cybercrime was new age crimes. For example, internet time theft or data theft, something that was new, was not explored earlier. Even the law did not know how to define data theft, because theft was always about tangible, movable property, which means I could steal something that I could see, hold, and feel. That is about tangibility of movable property. So that's how we struggled in a way to understand what cyber law is. But 20 years later, the laws have evolved, not just the laws have evolved. There are several laws that need to be read together to understand what cyber law is. And it is no longer, if anybody has a perception that it's only the Information Technology Act is what cyber law is, then that's the first thing you should take out of your mind. There are so many legislations now which have now the cyber sort of aspect related to it. For example, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, POCSO, also includes crimes which are cyber related. You will also have the Indian Evidence Act, which has been heavily amended. You have the Indian Penal Code, which has been heavily amended. You have other legislations like RBI guidelines and SEBI, and guidelines which relate to payment industry or payment cards or online payments or payment apps. So all of that, if you reach together, then you can actually say that is cyber law. And then you need to look at what is your subject. For example, we're talking of sexual harassment. Then which are these laws that you would want to consider to look at sexual harassment in, say, cyberspace? And as I said, I want to say that again, there is no firm bifurcation, and there shouldn't be, because our lives are not like that. Our lives are not black and white. It's not for 3 hours I'm online and the rest of the hours I'm offline. It's no longer that, which means the overlap has to be there even in terms of how the laws are applied.
Okay, that's amazing, because we look at it, many times we look at it very narrowly. And now what you're saying is that broaden your perspective from various aspects, like simple thing like POCSO. I couldn't have thought of that POCSO and cyber law could be, merged together, looked at it together. Okay, that's quite an interesting aspect, Vaishali. So Vaishali, if I have to just carry forward that question, what are the different kinds of cyber harassment do you think women face? Okay, it could be workplace, it could be anywhere outside. What, according to you, are they typical? Yeah.
Okay, so again, I always like to come back to, sort of a reality check. When women are exposed, let's say when women are in public spaces or in private spaces, they are susceptible or vulnerable to violence, either from the same gender or the male gender or any other gender. So it is about human interaction. Medium is irrelevant. Where you do the violence, it almost is insignificant, right? It is who is the victim, what is the impact, and what was the act. Now the only question is how it was done, or in terms of in which medium it was done. But what has now, having said this, what has changed is because of the cyber medium, which is very fluid, there are several things that you could do in the cyber medium which you could not have done in the real medium. That is what poses the challenge and makes cyber violence easy and targets more vulnerable and more susceptible. Another reason why we see increase in, and I will come to what exactly we mean by cyber violence, and we'll take, maybe I'll just talk about 15 ways in which cyber violence, or 10 ways in which cyber violence can be defined or addressed. But trying to understand how the medium is, we need to understand how people react to a particular medium. People generally feel more safe on the medium to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do in real life. For example, saying sorry or I love you on the internet is much easier than doing it face to face. Similarly, even usage of abusive language becomes much easier because of the power of the medium. Now, the power of the medium also can be because it gives you a false sense of anonymity. Most of the times, people will hide behind, say, a false identity. Mature users will do that under a false identity. Mature users will do it under a proxy identity. More mature users will do something else and use technology in such a way that it's more difficult to trace them. But I am sure Rajkumar will throw more light on that as to how easy it is actually to trace criminals. Yeah. And we always say in cybercrime investigations, you cannot bribe cyber evidence. You can make witnesses hostile, but the cyber evidence will always speak the truth. So I think this is also something that we need to remember in cybercrime investigations. Now, this was just to put this in perspective as to why is it so easy for people to indulge in criminal activities online? Because it's the power of the medium. It's how you would sense that it'll be very difficult to track a perpetrator or an offender down. I'm hiding behind an identity and all of that. And yes, women become more susceptible, more vulnerable, as in any other circumstance, and more so because now they are open to a community who feels much bolder on this medium. So let's look at perhaps something that tops the list, and I'll come to then domestic or violence related to, say, intimate relationships. But sexist hate speech, I feel, is something that is most common, most prevalent, and the easiest way in which women are targeted. Go on any online forum and see when a woman has actually made a comment on, say, politics or even climate change, and if people don't agree with her, people generally don't talk about a counter argument to, say, climate change or her views on climate change. People will resort to words that we generally use, like slut shaming, or talking about her character, using extreme abusive language, giving threats, violent threats, threats of rape. So this is what generally we call it as misogynist behavior, even in offline space. And that becomes very, very evident when it comes to online spaces. And what we also tell women is, what is the remedy women resort to in a situation like this? Quit social media or get away from the online medium. And that is where we are saying that if you look at a feminist approach to this subject, the equal access to internet itself gets denied to women. And that is something that even women need to remember, that running away doesn't serve the purpose at all. So sexist hate speech. Then common words that we all know, I say sextortion. So the law generally doesn't talk about consensual sharing of intimate images. Now we all know that perhaps that's the worst thing anyone can do, but we also know that especially the younger generation, it is almost part of their life or culture to not only record sexual intimacy, but also share either videos or images or text or whatever. And then when the relationship goes bad, then one person can actually use that imagery to threaten the other. And that is generally called as either revenge porn or sextortion, depending on the context. The fourth or the fifth, I have lost track, is cyber grooming. It's a very peculiar way in which relationships are built online, and cyber grooming victims are generally young children or young girls. When I say young children, boys are equally vulnerable to offenses of cyber grooming, especially because it is about building a relationship of trust on the net. And it is so easy for even you and me. I mean, with all this, gyan that we give, I'm going to go back and perhaps click on I accept a friend request from a total stranger. So you say something, but you do something else, and it's true for all of us. And then after this relationship of trust is built, generally the predator or who is a pedophile would um, start talking about content which is a bit sexualized content. We also call that as there's graded approach where grooming happens. So initially it is just friendship, then a little bit of sexualized content is introduced, then that behavior gets normalized, then it goes a notch higher, and then it goes a notch higher to a level where the child doesn't even feel that he's sexually exploited. The child has normalized the behavior, and that is why children don't report. The breeding ground for cyber grooming, if I can say, is gaming sites where there are interactive games where children play these games and talk to strangers completely unmonitored, and in a way parents have no clue of what their child is doing. Another reason why this happens is our dialogue with our children is very, very low when it comes to it. And mothers will generally say, oh, I don't understand this technology. I don't know, but he plays some games and, that's about it. So cyber grooming is something that we all should be really, really worried about. Then it comes to other forms of sexual violence. It could be sharing of violent sexual images or threatening with violent sexual images. Morphing, which is again, as I said, a very, very common way in which women get sexually exploited over the net. Trafficking, we somehow feel trafficking is something, very serious, and it happens only in offline spaces. Trafficking, again, is very, very common when it comes to online abuse or online cyber violence, because the images which are taken otherwise in an intimate relationship, or even abusive, abusive sexual content, then gets sold for money. That is a very typical way in which trafficking happens, and there will be thousands of sites on which these clips are available, and these are of real people and of real relationships where women get exploited, because the consent is when they are in a consensual intimate relationship. Doxing is another, because sometimes we hear these words, so I'm trying to repeat these words to really put into context what it really means. Doxing is something where women are again at the most vulnerable place, because in a way private information which could be available on several sites across the internet gets collected and gets posted in a particular form that makes her very, very exposed, and that information is not necessarily that she would want to have published in a particular place. So doxing is something especially celebrities really, really suffer from. And then there is flaming and there's trolling. And again, I'm particularly using these words because these are used in common parlance. Now, if you open a law book and you start looking for, oh, now let me look for this offense of trolling, you're not going to find it. So what you need to, and if there are lawyers, and I'm sure most of them, there will be lawyers, and what you need to understand is what is trolling, how is trolling defined, and then look for a particular section under IT Act or IPC so that you map the act against the section. I can go on, but I'll stop here. Thanks.
No, I think that these are such words that we have not heard, and this is something may be happening, but we may know the act, but not a nomenclature to that. So thank you very much for that. And that just gives us a thing that maybe we should create a dictionary over it and, see what it is and understand this really better. Okay. So I'm now moving to Aishwarya. Aishwarya, if I have to ask you about provisions that protect women, Indian laws that is available for this realm. So what is it that you would want to share?
I think first, before I get into that, I want to thank Ms. Smita for not only for giving me such an incredibly warm welcome for today's session, but also for putting together this whole discussion, given the overwhelmingly positive response that we got from the previous session, which I was a part of. So And from what I can understand already from what Ms. Vaishali has given, I know for a fact that today's session is also going to be another incredible learning opportunity for me as well. Not just from the audience, but also from my fellow esteemed fellow panelists. So now I think getting back to the discussion, the question that Ms. Vaishali beautifully described all the various examples of cybercrime or cyber violence that women today face. Getting into the legal perspective of how the law defines it and what are the penalties that are there, for example. So I think I can start with cyber stalking. That is one thing that a lot of us have faced personally also, and we can all attest to it. And to put it very simply, stalking just means repetitive attempts by a person to contact another person, thereby causing a sort of sense of danger or threat in the mind of the other person. And unfortunately, I feel that a cyber stalker's biggest advantage is the fact that they can hide behind the screen. And because the internet provides so much anonymity, and they can keep a tab on the victim's activities online, and at the same time ensure that their identity is also being goes undetected. So to combat this issue of cyber stalking, after the infamous Nirbhaya rape case in 2012, the legislators introduced the Criminal Law Amendment of 2013, which brought in several changes to the Indian Penal Code, which is what I'll be talking about initially. And there were a lot of sections that were brought in, like say the asset attack legislation and so on and so forth. But with regard to cyber stalking, I would say that section 354B of the Indian Penal Code is of note here, where it defines stalking in general, but it also talks about cyber stalking and says that any man who monitors the activity of a woman on the internet or through any other electronic communication commits the offense of stalking. But I feel like here there is one loophole, or I'd say, which leaves the law incomplete, is the fact that the lawmakers have failed to define the intention or bring in the concept of intention of the stalker. Because not every act that we do online amounts to cyber stalking. Only if you have an intention of stalking someone does it become an issue. So that intention part, I feel, should be brought in this section. Second would be section 509 of the IPC, which talks about words, gestures, or acts intending to insult the modesty of a woman. And so these are, and section 507 as well of the IPC, which talks about criminal intimidation by anonymous communication. So whereby in the cases where the stalker tries to hide his own or her identity so that the victim remains unaware of the source of the threat from where it's coming. So that would also be an offense under this section. So I think at this point, at this juncture in this discussion, I think it's important that I talk about the Information Technology Act 2000 and the very important 2008 amendment, given the topic of our discussion today. So in 2008, to keep up with the times and to keep up with globalization and to basically address all the complexities that arise with the use of the internet, the 2008 amendment to the IT Act was brought up to promote basically e-commerce and facilitate e-governance, and also more importantly to prevent cybercrime. So under this amendment, quite a few sections were added. One of it is section 67 of the Act, which makes publishing of obscene material in any electronic form an offense. So if a person tries to publish any obscene material about the victim on social media or email or any other electronic form, and with the purpose of bullying the victim, he or she shall be guilty of the offense under this section. Next will be section 67A, which talks about publishing of any sexually explicit material in electronic form through emails, messages, or social media. And 67B, like Ms. Vaishali spoke about how children are being targeted these days. This section talks about publishing material in which children are engaged in sexual activities, and which is unfortunately a grave concern these days. So that is something that is being addressed in section 67B. And if you're coming back to the Indian Penal Code, I think we can talk about section 354C, which deals with voyeurism. So you can bring it with cyber voyeurism as well. So what is voyeurism actually? It basically refers to any person without who watches or captures the image of another person engaging in a private act. It doesn't have to be sexual in nature. It can be anything that a person does in private. Another person watching it or capturing the images of the same without their consent would amount to voyeurism. So then I think next one important thing that we can cover is cyber defamation, which I think Ms. Vaishali very beautifully said how women today face a lot of sexist hate speech, and given that there's a lot of issues where I mean, it's sad that we live in a society or a social construct is that, there is our modesty or everything of a woman is so delicate. And if she has an opinion or if she chooses to voice her opinion on any issue, immediately there are people who are character shaming her, victim shaming her, slut shaming her. It's not about the issue anymore. It becomes very personal. So in that case, this becomes a case of cyber defamation. And generally, I mean, we've heard a lot about defamation in general today, if you look at it. I mean, there's a debate between what exactly amounts to defamation versus freedom of speech and expression. That being said, I think Section 499 of the Indian Penal Code tackles the law of defamation, but this has to be read along with Section 4 of the Information Technology Act, which gives recognition to electronic records. So reading these two provisions together would help penalize someone who's engaged in such acts through these two sections, I would say. Then comes the issue of cyber pornography, which also involves revenge porn, like Ms. Vaishali had said. This is something that is becoming increasingly an issue these days, and there have been a lot of cases where this has happened, where adults who were in previously consensual relationships and shared images between each other or videos, which are now being passed after, in the form of revenge. So that is something that can be penalized under Section 292 of the IPC, which defines obscenity. And any person who sends obscene materials to the victim on a social networking site or shares it also is capable of being penalized under this offense. I would also like to talk about 354A of the IPC, which also interestingly penalizes showing pornography to a woman and considered to be another form of sexual harassment. So also morphing. I mean, generally we've all heard of morphing, but what is it? It's basically editing somebody's picture or fusing somebody's picture to make it look like they're in a very compromising position or something that they wouldn't usually do, and circulating it. So here I think Section 66E of the Information Technology Act, which talks about privacy violation or by publishing images of a private area of a person, and in that case they can be convicted or penalized under this section. Also, I think there's another act, which is the Indecent Representation of Women Prohibition Act of 1986. Here, I think Section 4 is very important in our context today, which talks about circulation of material containing indecent representation of women and also penalizes them accordingly. So I know I've not covered all the bases, but these are some of the fundamentals when it comes to cybercrimes and the laws related to it.
I think you have covered quite a bit, for us to chew for today. So I think we'll have to do part by part justice to this. I would want to ask Rajkumar ji this question that, Aishwarya spoke about IT and IPC. So why are we looking at it when we have an IT Act, which is full-fledged, combining it with IPC, which Vaishali also mentioned that, we have to look at two acts together. Does it weaken the IT Act?
Yeah. So first of all, I think, Smita, thank you very much for this generous introduction of mine and other panelists as well. I think the question is, the right question. Why? Vaishali brought out that point as well. So I will definitely come to that point. And before that, I just want to, in the interest of the women, I think we have enormous powers as far as the POSH Act is concerned for the external members. So let me focus about, two important changes in the laws, or I can say new laws formulated, or there was one already existing law. Of course, those were not statutory acts, but I think we need to place the reliance on this new information technology, in bracket intermediary guidelines and digital media ethics code, which are basically called as Information Technology Rules 2021. And this is very important for us because we are actually helping the women when they're harassed, sexually harassed. And then I also want to place reliance upon this another, I can say another law which says that information technology in bracket procedures and safeguards for interception, monitoring and decryption of information rules 2009. I'll discuss in little detail because this is very important, because for everything we need not go to the law enforcement agency. So as a victim, we can also, directly deal with these kind of things because of these new laws formulated. I will not touch upon Indian Evidence Act and other. Vaishali also covered about Banker's Book Evidence Act 1891. But I think there is one, and some states have specific laws also to deal with the sexual harassment of women. For example, if you see Tamil Nadu, so they have Tamil Nadu Women Harassment Act 1988. Especially, it talks about Section 4, like the Indecent Representation of Women Act, which Aishwarya covered. So I will not go to in details into the IPC, but I think yes. Let me talk about Section 2B of this information technology rules. I think this is very important. I just want to read few excerpts from that. It says that the intermediary shall, within 24 hours of receipt of complaint made by an individual. This is very important. It says that individual or any person in relation to any content which is prima facie in nature of any material which exposes a private area of such individual or is in the nature of impersonation, including artificially morphed images of such individual, take all reasonable and practical measures to remove or disable such content which is hosted, stored, published, or transmitted by it. It means it's saying that we can go to the intermediary directly and then we can request them, see, there is something wrong here. You have to remove this content, which is very objectionable, because I am, or probably my people who are near to me, they are directly sufferers because of this act. And it further places the obligation on the intermediary. It says that the intermediary shall implement a mechanism for the receipt of complaints under clause B, which we just discussed, of this sub rule to provide details in relation to such content or communication link. It means there is again the obligation on the intermediary. They should develop or devise a mechanism to receive such complaints. So law enforcement, definitely we have to go to the law enforcement agency. They can do their part. I think in the meanwhile, because they also take some time, but in the meanwhile, we can also directly contact these intermediaries and then probably request them to remove such content. And again, if I place lines on Section 4.2 of the same act or same rules, it also places the obligation on the intermediary, or we can say the social media intermediary, which is providing services primarily in the nature of messaging. It places the obligation upon them and says that they shall enable the identification of the first originator of the information. The person who created that information or the content, it is a responsibility on the intermediary to find out and let us know. And it basically empowers the court of competent jurisdiction or order passed under Section 69 of Information Technology, which I just mentioned, procedure and safeguards for interception, monitoring, and decryption of information rules. It means that this law is empowering the court of competent jurisdiction as well as the concerned authority under Section 969 of Information Technology Rules 2009. Yeah, so I think there are a few more in this. I would not go into. And the same, the rules also talk about if there is a discrimination. I'm specially covering from the sexual harassment perspective here. It also talks about if there is the women discriminated on the grounds of gender. I think that also this particular rules takes care of. And also if there is sexual content which is prohibited by the law, in such cases also can be definitely, we can reach out to the concerned intermediary and then it can be taken care of. So I think your question was basically when there is a dedicated law like Information Technology Act, then why we place reliance upon other acts like IPC, major acts or any other acts. Recently, I think there was a judgment in the month of May, I think on May 18th, Supreme Court passed a judgment. The judgment was passed by the bench of Justice Dinesh Maheshwari and Aniruddha Bose. In this case was basically Jagdish Singh versus the state of Punjab. It was earlier decided by the Punjab High Court. It was about the data theft. In this particular case, when the Supreme Court pronounced the judgment, it said that in addition to the provisions of the IT Act, offences under IPC would also be attracted. and that IT Act would not exclude the applicability of the IPC. So this is one, they are saying that with the information technology, or when there is a special act like we can say the POSH law, or maybe we can say about the Information Technology Act, there is no restriction on using other acts as well with this. So that is what the point is. And what is important here is, because many a times if you see the Information Technology Act, or if you can see IPC, or if you can see the amendments to the IPC made in 2013, all these three acts which are majorly used in the sexual harassment cases, that that doesn't cover everything. Let me place, for example, reliance upon Vaishali mentioned about sextortion. If you go and file the complaint under Sexual Harassment Act at the IPC, probably not IPC, but if you can go under the IT Act, there is no specific section for sextortion. So here we have to rely upon IPC section 503, which says that whoever threatens another with injury or to his person, reputation, or property, or to the person or reputation of anyone in whom that person is interested. So we have to rely upon these kind of sections or the laws. Then again, it is cheating. Cheating is very important here. If you see, in many of the sexual harassment cases, especially there is a promise given to the victim. Under that promise, the sexual favors or sexual favors were sought. And many a time the rape cases were filed also because of the, and the cheating section is very much applicable in such cases. And if you strictly go by the IT Act, I think then we will not get the answer as far as this is concerned. If you see this Raj Kundra's case, we'll talk about that if we get the time. In that particular case also here, the police applied section 420 here, because all those girls who had come from different parts of the country, from the very, weaker economic background, and those girls were promised the roles in the web series, but it was not given, and they said that will. And when they came, the entire content of the text was changed. So that was basically cheating. So in such cases, the police also applied section 420 along with other sections of IPC as well as the Information Technology Act. Section 34 they applied with the common intention, because acts done by several persons in the furtherance of common intention, that is there. Then in this particular case of Raj Kundra, if you see there is section 201, it talks about destruction of evidence or causing disappearance of the evidence of offense or giving false information to the screen offender. So this is again very important. This was not anticipated or not covered in those laws, because the law, because that has to be married with other laws and then give strengthen the hands of the law enforcement agencies and also give the confidence to the victim. Yes, that can be taken care of. So if you see other laws also, for example, 354A, that is in the amendment in IPC. If you go to the IT Act, there is no specific section. Or if you see section 66E, it talks about just give a passing reference about in the IT Act about use of criminal force with intent to disrobe a woman. But if you see, there is 7 years imprisonment as far as the amendment in IPC is concerned. But however, in 66E in IT Act, there is just a passing reference. It's not clearly mentioned. Then Aishwarya mentioned about voyeurism. If you see here, there is for the first offense, it is 1 to 3 years imprisonment. And for the second offense, it is 3 years imprisonment. But if you go to 66E, it is again 3 years. For the first offense also, you can directly go to the IT Act instead of 354C, because this is more suiting us or the victim. Likewise, if you see then stalking also, only it has a reference in IPC. It doesn't talk in IT Act. If you can't just rely upon IT Act. Likewise, there are many other sections. I will not go into details, I think, but there are few other sections which talk. That's the reason we have to use all the acts, whichever applicable or probably relevant, together to make the case very strengthened and then probably give the justice to the victim.
So Rajkumarji, just because you brought up the Raj Kundra's case, now what I understood out of it is that there were adults and they were consenting for the act, right? And he's still put behind bars. But there are conflicting views, right? So what is your opinion? I would want to hear, because you come from a field which must have dealt with such kind of situations. So I wanted to hear from you, because this is clearly, it's a very confusing thing which is going on, because there are multiple reports that we read, so we're not sure what's happening there. Sometimes it says that there are political pressures and so many other things that is happening.
Yeah.
So if you are looking at it pure play, considering cyber crime law that we are discussing, so what is it that you think?
Yeah, I think let us first give the version of Raj Kundra, what he's saying, because every accused or every respondent always say, I'm innocent. So in this particular case, actually, if you do some research, you will find out there is one tweet in 2012, which Raj Kundra tweeted. It says that he mentioned, okay, so here goes porn versus prostitution. Why is it legal to pay someone for sex on camera? And how is one different to other? So those are his views. So he doesn't think this is an offense. He thinks whatever he does, I think for him, it could be probably that is interpretation. It may not be basically a crime according to him. But I think if you see the case here, what I was reading from the public domain, I think I spoke to my sources, and if I was going through also the judgment passed by the Bombay High Court, denying the bail or rejecting the bail of Raj Kundra and others. In this particular case, the FIR says that there were poor girls who came from different parts of the country, and they were promised the job for acting in the web series, but did not happen. I just mentioned. And then when they realized that they were cheated, and when they said that, okay, we can't do this, they said, no, you have to do this now. Otherwise, the entire bill of this arrangement, whatever preparations we have made, you have to foot that bill. So that is how they were blackmailed. And those I think the shooting was carried out. And all this happened in the outskirts of Mumbai, like places like Aksa and all near Mud. And when you see this, all this, and then not only that remained, it did not remain there. It went ahead. There are some apps created, and there were two companies of Raj Kundra. If you see this, one app was created. The app's name was Hotshot, and it was through his company called as Vian Industries, and there is one more company called as Arms Pro Media Private Limited. Not only these 9 people as far as this case is concerned, but also I think what is important here is his brother-in-law's name also came in this particular case, whose name is Pradeep Bakshi. That is what the public domain searches say. And he is also owner of the Kenrin Private Limited company in London. And Raj Kundra is also a British citizen. So I'm not saying, because there is still the trial to happen, charge sheet to go against Raj Kundra, but I think already the police submitted the charge sheet against 5 people. So during the course of investigation, his name came up. And not only just because the accused said in this particular case, the police in fact had found out the, I can say, the documentary evidence, electronic evidence, circumstantial evidence, and oral evidence. They are not just relying upon the source information, or probably they are relying upon only upon the accused statement. It's not so. And all this information actually is available with the police, and they are relying upon that. I don't think that this case could be a fabricated or it has a political implication. Whatever I read so far, I feel that this is, I think, a genuine case where the victims were harassed or probably blackmailed, or there was extortion to, I think, fulfill their demands of doing the porn videos and all.
Okay, that's quite a revelation, because there are so many multiple reports coming in, and
Yeah.
sorry for that question. Yeah.
And interesting is what I just spoke about. I did not speak about Raj Kundra. I was speaking about Ripu Sudan Balkishan.
Okay.
So the real name of Raj Kundra is Ripu Sudan Balkishan Kundra, alias Raj Kundra. Just for the information of the
didn't know
participants.
That.
Yeah.
I was thinking, did you speak about somebody else?
No, I just, yeah.
All right, that's quite a piece of information. So I want to ask this question maybe to Aishwarya and Vaishali or Rajkumar, you yourself. So coming to prevention of sexual harassment, cyber law, and prevention of sexual harassment, what is it that we should be aware of? Sexual harassment in workplace, right? What should we be aware of? How these two should be looked at together? How we as advocates of POSH should know about cyber law. Okay, so anything that you would want to add here?
Yeah, I think we see, as we are into this field, I think, and Vaishali also mentioned that it's not only one law, there could be many laws. We discussed few laws here. I think we should have, I think what Vaishali said, I think I just want to sum up that. I can just say that we should be knowing 4 important laws here. Is basically, one is constitutional law, second is labor law, and third is the anti-sexual harassment law, and other laws. I think and the labor law. I think these are very important, because even though we are just external members only handling the cases as far as the POSH Act is concerned, we are not concerned with other acts. But I think Vaishali also covered, I think, the point about the civil laws. So that also are very important. And our case, basically, suppose if you properly arrive at a decision as far as when we are conducting the investigation, or the inquiry as far as the POSH Act is concerned, I think that will have implications further also, because the affected parties or the parties who are not happy with the findings of the committee, they may definitely go to the concerned court of laws, like they may go to the tribunal or the appellate authority, or they could go to the Supreme Court or the High Court, wherever. They have various channels or the forums they can go and then challenge. I think if we conduct the investigation properly, because in those cases, it will not be challenged only about the POSH law, but I think there would be various factors by the defense lawyers would be brought out, and there would be, probably would be very relevant also as far as getting the justice for their client is there.
Sure. Thank you very much for that part. Aishwarya, I come to you. Vaishali, I come to you regarding those nuances which does not get covered in cyber harassment. It could be some borderline cases. Example that we were discussing, simple things like somebody sending you a text message, right? It doesn't have any sexual context. You only gave that example, right? You accept it, okay? And then that person starts a conversation, like maybe sending you a good morning message every day, right? It is not really sexual harassment, but somewhere that this is not a right kind of conversation. So these kind of borderline cases, or I won't even want to call it cases, but something that makes you uncomfortable, but is not covered in the law. So what happens to those instances? Is there anything in the law that protects, or anything that can be done about it?
So I think before I take this question, Smita, can I just add to what Mr. Rajkumar said about what are the organizational measures one needs to take, or things that one needs to know in terms of organizations to deal with cyber?
Yes.
Was that your question? Was cyber harassment, say, at workplace?
No, I have that question a little later.
All right, so then I'll park that.
Yeah.
All right. So coming back to your question about, say, borderline cases. So ideally, there is no such thing as, is there a law or isn't there a law? There is any act that impacts the victim with either inconvenience or fear or humiliation or a violation of privacy. Anything that hurts a victim, the victim needs to be protected against that, right? I mean, this is how we live in a civilized society. Then now the only question is which section to apply. Because when a victim says, I'm hurting because this is what was done, as you said, messages are being sent, repetitive messages are being sent. The victim is trying to convey in her own way, either in a verbal communication or in a non-verbal form, or the way she responds in the messages, that she's not happy with this communication. So if you look at, and I think Aishwarya did point that section out, when the section was about cyber stalking. Somehow when we use the word cyber stalking, we think, oh, it has to be something very serious and very grave. Not necessarily. The section itself says that if there is a repetitive form of communication for fostering personal friendship or relationship, and if that person receiving the messages is inconvenienced with it, she has an adequate right to ask the person to stop. I'm not even going to that extent of that this communication has caused fear, because then the section that gets invoked is even something else, which could be criminal intimidation or intimidation, because now that communication has started causing fear in the mind of the victim. Another form of such communication could be where it goes a notch higher again, where the communication is sexualized, it has violence, it has unnatural depiction of sexual intimacy, and all of that will get covered in specific sections which already have been mentioned, and I will not repeat it. There are several sections under IT Act and IPC. The only thing that needs to be looked into here is, and as lawyers or law enforcement, there is a law against double jeopardy. And Mr. Rajkumar has already stated what the Supreme Court has said and how IT Act sections as well as IPC sections can be applied. But while applying these two sections, one has to be careful that for the same act, two sections from two different laws are not applied. Because which means for one wrong, you are convicting or you are making the person responsible under two different legislation, and that should not happen. He has to be convicted only for one, under just one law, if it's a common section, because there will be overlapping sections. Another thing that needs to be also looked into in say borderline cases is sometimes you may not have a direct section that that you can go to the police and say, I want to file, this has happened, and the police could say, or the investigating agencies could say that there is no direct section and we cannot take cognizance of it. So that typically we say these are non-cognizable cases. That is where a relief from the court can be taken for proceeding against a particular person when the person is victimized. Unfortunately, and I would like to bring this up, in India, we do not have civil remedies for sexual harassment the way it comes under POSH. It is very difficult for victims to go to the civil court and ask for compensation. However, now having said that, the victims can approach the civil court for injunctive relief, asking the courts to pass a restraining order, restraining the person not to indulge into acts that are causing inconvenience or fear or damage or harassment.
Okay, that's an important piece, because many a times we want to shut it off saying nothing will happen and we cannot do anything about it. So that's, I think, a very important piece. And I know we have a lot of things to discuss. So Vaishali, can you extend this a little further and tell us that what a victim can do, okay, to protect themselves under such cyber crime that occurred against them, and what are those things that organizations can do to protect them? So I know I've asked you two questions at the same time, but if you could help with that piece will be great.
So let me say first things first. When a victim is victimized, or when somebody is hurting, or some sort of information is there on the net which is causing humiliation, it is causing sexual violence, it's causing sexual harassment, what would the victim want? The first thing to happen is removal of content. She's really not interested in, oh, I want to see him behind the bars, I want him to pay compensation. That comes much later. First thing she's worried about is, I don't want that content to remain there. That needs to be taken down. Or that person needs, so we get a lot of cases where the person is threatening that I'm going to now send these messages to multiple people, and it's just a press of a button away. So what does she need? There she needs a restraining order immediately, and courts can be very, very vigilant and active in giving such restraining orders. We also get these restraining orders under Domestic Violence Act, also the any of the special marriages or the Hindu Marriage Act. Takedown was already touched upon under the intermediary guidelines. There is a specific provision now available where you can go to court and ask for a court order which will direct an intermediary. Now, who's an intermediary? For example, Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or any of these social medias are intermediaries, and they also are called, some are called significant intermediaries, where the obligation for due diligence is now much higher than what it was earlier. So you can actually go to court, take an order for takedown of that information, and the intermediary is obligated to take the material down within 36 hours of informing the intermediary. So that is a great relief, which was already there, and Shreya Singhal judgment established that as one of the rights in the by the Supreme Court as to what can be done in terms of takedown. Perhaps few people know about it, but it is worth a relief that anyone should go after. So sometimes when even communications are anonymous, the FIRs get filed against an unknown person, but takedown is a real relief. Then you can look at, investigation, charge sheet, and all of that will come later on. So the next step is file a FIR. Trust the system. Most of the times we say, oh, nothing will happen, police don't do anything. I don't believe that. Trust the system. Unless and until you don't file a FIR, you don't expect the investigating officers to help you or do something for you. So it is important that you invest your faith in the system and go ahead and file a police complaint. The third, and I already mentioned that, is eventually go to the civil court and file a case for even civil relief for compensation if there is defamation. So 499, yes, in terms of a criminal relief for defamation, but you can also ask for monetary compensation under 499, monetary compensation under a civil suit under tort for compensation for defamation. So these are, say, set of reliefs, and I'm not even getting into posh relief because we all know the IC would do what IC has the powers to do under posh.
Yes.
Now coming to what organizations can do, I think that was your second question.
Yes.
See, organizations first need to now understand that there is no such thing as virtual workplace and real workplace. It is workplace in any form, and it is about conduct. So it is workplace and acceptable conduct. Acceptable conduct needs to be defined in black and white. That's the first step any organization needs to do. So you can have an acceptable computer usage policy, or you can have a code of conduct which states you cannot expect everyone to read a law book. You can't expect everyone to know what the section 354 ABCD say or what IT Act section says. So what, even in POSH, what we do, there is a provision of making a policy. So the law, it gets translated in an easier, more consumable language for the employees to understand what am I supposed to do under POSH Act. Similarly, organizations should take efforts to translate these legislations into say do's and don'ts list and say this is acceptable behavior and this is non-acceptable behavior. For example, cyber stalking. The moment you put that as form of your code of conduct policy, the employees is now well aware that if you do this, this will amount to cyber stalking, which is misconduct, and disciplinary action has to be initiated. So there could be a list of policies and they need to be harmonized. So code of conduct, social media policy, POSH policy, there could be BYOD in some companies, all need to read into each other. You can't have 5 buckets. You can have 5 buckets, but they have to also be interlinked so that they talk to each other. And in totality, you ensure that even virtual workplace harassment, and because now workplace definition is blurred, work timing definitions are blurred, home and work definitions are no longer in black and white. That is why all these policies now need to regulate behavior in offline as well as online spaces in totality. And that is how organizations should look at it.
That's so important, and considering current situation, I think those are great tips for all of us as an organization to follow. I come to Aishwarya, and Aishwarya, we have a few landmark judgments on cyber stalking. I know we are little running behind time, but if you could quickly share 1 or 2 important ones which the participants should know, and we could discuss that. You're on mute, Aishwarya.
My bad, sorry. I think Mr. Rajkumar and Ms. Vaishali have actually covered 1 or 2 important judgments when it comes to cyber laws. But I think I'll quickly walk you through some of the important, or I would say landmark judgments, which have actually paved the way for enforcement of the provisions brought under the IT Amendment Act as well as the IPC and other legislations as well. So if you look at it, there's this case of Tamil Nadu, state of Tamil Nadu versus Suhas Katti. where this was the first case of conviction under Section 67, which I had previously spoken about, where the accused was actually prosecuted for sending obscene messages and images of a divorcee woman onto the about a divorcee woman to the on the internet. And then you have a very famous case in back in 2006, which is M. Saravanan versus State, wherein here the perpetrator was actually a doctor, and he had, without the consent of the woman, photographed and videographed her in her private place. I mean, doing. Basically, whatever she was doing, he had photographed it and videographed it without her consent, and he had distributed this all over the internet for money. So in this case, also the court recognized that it was a clear case of violation of her personal space, and so they convicted him under Section 67 as well. And look at one more famous case, I would say, is the Air Force Bal Bharti case, where in a school, actually, this involved minors, actually, and this was actually tracked down by the Delhi Police Cybercrime Cell, where it was found that one boy in a school, because it's actually sad to think about it, because he was mocked and ridiculed in his school environment by his peers, which led him to actually allegedly create a website where he started mocking and sexualizing a lot of his female classmates and also the teachers in that school. This created a huge issue back then, and finally, he was booked under Section 292 and 509 of the IPC, which is any act intended to insult the modesty of a woman, and Section 4 of the Indecent Representation Act, and Section 67 of the ID Act. So I feel like these are some of the cases where we can see that the court has actually said that these are clear-cut examples of cybercrime or cyber violence against women, and hence taken a very strong step towards the perpetrators of these crimes. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for that. I have few tricky cases in my conversations that I have come across. So I'm going to bring that up, and I think let's quickly discuss that, and it will be amazing to hear from all of you. See my screen? 1 minute. Can you see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yes. So this is case study 1. Whose fault is this?
Oh.
This is something that a woman candidate reached out to a recruiter at workplace. So the recruiter went through a profile, did first round of interview, and after like couple of interactions, rejected her. She was very upset with him, and on the chat message exchange, she used F-word, and she was using cuss words against the organization. So recruiter was very, very upset. What he did was he took a screenshot of the entire conversation and he put it up on the social media, tagging her current company. Now, my question is, who's at fault here and who should be reprimanded? So Vaishali, any input from you?
In my opinion, both are at fault. I think we also had this a little bit of discussion maybe earlier. When it comes to criminal cases, what we need to understand is the offense is against the state. The victim is an individual, no doubt. The victim is one person. So the one person is hurting, or it's an offense against that person, that she is wronged because he has put all the chat in public domain, and that is how she's now shown in bad light, and she's done the same. So it's not okay now tit for tat and it all gets evened out. The offense is committed when the messages were put out in the public domain, or when the messages were sent on chat even in a one-to-one communication. The offense gets completed over there, and that offense is against the state. The moment that offense gets completed, there is a right not only to the victim, but even for the police to take suo motu cognizance. So even if, let's assume, nobody goes to the police to file a case, just because this has happened in public domain, the police may, or the investigating officers or the police department can take suo motu cognizance of a complaint like this and get it registered as a FIR, because as I said, it's an offense against the state. It could be now two counter complaints that will get pitched against each other. There will be an outcome for both the complaints, but since the offenses have been committed, there will be a penal action that which will be a consequence or an outcome of this.
An extended question to Rajkumar about this. Is an organization responsible to monitor such behaviors if it comes in, like this organization was tagged? So does organization have any role here?
I think, Smita, what I feel is when the HR or probably any HR representative is interviewing anyone, I think as Vaishali also brought out that point, I think your code of conduct or maybe ethics policies, it should be so clearly defined, all these cases, the behavior. And I think nobody takes pain to do that kind of thing. I have seen so many policies, I drafted so many policies or amended the policies for various companies. I think if you see, I think there are hardly 1 or 2 pager code of conduct is there. I think seeing all this in last couple of years now, what we are seeing or experiencing these kind of things online or in the social media, I think this needs to be taken into consideration. And especially the pandemic has taught a lot. And we are completely, virtually we are connecting with each other nowadays. And so many new things are happening. And again, I think those kind of harassment, sexual harassment or discrimination, everything is happening on the social media now. But I think still so many companies are not ready or probably willing, or they are not done or amended any policies. So I think to that extent, I think the company definitely would, I think in some extent they are responsible. I think that education, or they should educate their employees in terms of, I think, behaving or probably how to talk to a lady while interviewing. I think these things are very important when especially any male employee or the representative talking to a women employee or the aspirant, or I can say the prospective employee. This is very important. I think that they need to be very responsible. Even suppose out of frustration, she must have committed a few things, something wrong. But I think they should take care, especially the men should take care that, see, there could be a civil action against her for her behavior, or maybe there could be some criminal case, or I can say the non-cognizable case. But however, if something goes wrong, there could be, as Vaishali just mentioned, that there could be a criminal case against the respondent, I can say the male employee. One has to be very careful and responsible while handling, I think, these kind of situations.
All right. Thank you very much for your input. There's one case, and then we'll take some questions. A woman employee produced a phone recording for an SH complaint, okay, of the accused, of course. So she was recording the conversation, and when you asked for proof, she said, I have a recording as a proof, right? So when we asked her that how did she get it, was she expecting that person to behave in an inappropriate way that she was recording this? So she said something to the effect that I record all my phone conversations, right? So that was a little, like our antennas going on, like ting, that all conversations get recorded. So are such recordings admissible in IC or court? Vaishali, want to say something, because we discussed about it, that how do we want to speak about this?
Any audio recording which is taken without consent is not directly admissible or will not be read in evidence in court. Now, there are two different things. What happens before the internal complaints committee is different because it's a quasi-judicial body, and rules of evidence do not apply as strictly as they would apply in a criminal proceeding or in a civil proceeding. So if you look at the Evidence Act, the applicability varies. The applicability is in the strictest form when it comes to criminal prosecution. It is a little lower when it comes to civil cases, and it is the lowest when it comes to IC, because IC functions basically on principles of natural justice, and rules of evidence are not directly applicable. If you look at the Act says only certain parts of the CPC and CRPC, when it comes to attendance of witnesses, asking for information from third parties, only those sections of CPC and CRPC are applied. are applicable. So we need to understand that nuanced difference between what will happen in different forums. And I'll tell you what will happen in different forums. In a criminal prosecution, an audio recording taken without consent of the person who is speaking is totally inadmissible unless the person who is filing the audio proceeding discharges its burden to prove that it is the audio recording of the person that he means it is of. For example, either it has to be done through a forensic comparison of the voice sample of the person who is being perpetrated to be recorded against the recording. So the first thing that you have to prove is the recorded voice and the person's voice is the same. The second thing that needs to be proved is that there is no tampering of the audio recording, because we all know it is so easy to change. You know, you can cut things off, you can add or you can patch, you do all sorts of patchwork and you file. So the courts are not going to believe it unless you discharge your burden to the fullest that forensically it is the audio recording of that person and not doctored at all. And then you have provisions like 65A of Evidence Act, you have 45A of Evidence Act, and you have provisions which substantiate that forensically it is admissible. Let's come to now what happens in IC for an audio recording. In principles of natural justice, the IC should not blind that it is the recording of the person alleged. I think again a newer understanding of this, because I get a lot of these questions. Is recording without permission in itself an offense? The answer is no. That itself is not an offense, but that audio recording has no evidentiary value unless the other person admits. So in a IC proceeding, the committee can ask the respondent, do you admit this audio recording? The moment he says yes, then okay, you rely on it, because that's part of principles of natural justice. Give an opportunity to the respondent to meet the evidence, to challenge the evidence. If the respondent says no, it's not my voice, then you cannot. And then you have to again go through a forensic analysis, comparison. It's done the way signatures are proved. You know, you have to do it through a handwriting expert. Here you will have to do with a forensic audio expert. The third case could be the respondent can say, see, this is my voice, but I didn't say all of this in this order. There were a lot of other things that I had said in between. Then again, evidentiary value of that audio recording goes down. So you have to be very mindful of how much reliance you want to place on audio recording, which per se is not admissible. And an entire IC recommendation can be set aside in an appeal if it is based on an evidence which is inadmissible.
Okay, all right. So I'm getting bombarded by questions and they are like upset with me that I've not asked you those questions. I'm going to stop our discussion and please focus on the questions. I know I'm just kind of stopping you in between. So Advocate Akash is asking about dark net in India. Any thoughts on that? What is dark net? And in India, it's there.
Rajkumar is the best person to answer this.
Yeah, but I think I'm not. I mean, have studied much about this particular aspect. But what I understand is, I think this kind of dark net exists because there were so many cases happened in the past where people had information and they use that information in a wrong way, and then I think there were a lot of inconvenience caused to various people, whether it could be siphoning of the amount from the bank accounts or various other things. There was a very big topic, in fact, the dark net. So I think that thing is available in India. The cases happened, but I think who did what, where it happened, I may not be able to comment on that. But I think, yeah, the cases have happened in the past and the dark net.
And just add a little bit to what he just said. Sometimes the darknet is also called the onion router, which means it's a very layered mechanism in which the internet works. And the internet that we all operate, very openly and freely, and leaving all our traces behind everywhere, wherever we touch the key, and you'll have a trail of traces as to how you use the net, is where normal people like you and me use the net. But now if you want all these footprints to be masked, and that is where people will access the internet in a form that gives them complete anonymity. And that is where that is what darknet is, that it assures you anonymity, and there will be tools and ways and means in which you can access the net. And that is where most of the criminal activities do take place.
Wow, that is quite intense. I think as we are evolving, making stricter and stringent law, I think the crimes are also evolving and becoming very, very difficult. They're also going to a different level. But I'm sure we'll win.
In I think 2020, last year, there was a case where I think one of the first in India where the person accused of, he had actually used the dark net to sell psychedelic substances and drugs under the garb of sexual medication or something like that. So the Narcotics Bureau actually caught him using the dark web to sell such products. So I think that was a recent case that was making the rounds on the news sometime last year.
All right, Aishwarya, thank you. I think Vashisht is there, and he's saying he wants to answer that. Vashisht, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you can unmute and share something.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, to give a very basic thought about the darknet, it's basically the word dark comes through the colloquial slang of how we refer due to the notorious activities that we have been constantly assumed from time to time. It's actually on a generic word, it's just the deep web. Whatever we browse on Google, on Chrome, Edge, Mozilla Firefox browsers, it is just a deeper version of it. What we browse on these regular browsers is a surface level websites or access to certain internet portions that are harmless and that are verified by certain companies and governments. Deep webs and darknet, basically, yes, agreed totally that it is used for all nefarious purposes. But on certain countries where the free speech is curbed and fettered, and the government and the perpetrators in this very case are governments, the right to internet accessed by people with thoughts, people with ideas, and people who want liberation, darknet and all the deep web serves as the only way. Because yes, Ms. Vaishali was correct about the anonymity that it guarantees, and virtual ID that is possible to be created. But there is something that differs an anonymity to pseudonymity. The position of being pseudonymous and the position of being anonymous is just that only your name is hidden, but your actions aren't. Your actions, your transactions, or your your online virtual presence is felt, is reported, or is documented. So to give a more detailed, a very clear or explicit answer, the deep web offers pseudonymity to the users. Just that I wanted to give that.
All right, thank you for that insight, Vashishta. Moving to another question, what is cyber victim compensation schemes available in India? Do we have anything on those lines?
The only compensation schemes available are under the POCSO Act and the Juvenile Justice Act. Otherwise, there are no, as far as I know, notified compensation schemes announced by the government for women who are victims of cybercrime.
Okay. I think, Aishwarya, you responded to that question. WhatsApp allows any user's online time to any stranger, irrespective of others being in one's phone book. There are softwares that actively monitor any person's online activity and generates a report on a person's social time. This is used by parents and more dangerously by stalkers. Is this not a violation of privacy problem and stalking concern for women? I think you responded to that, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, that also borders on privacy being an issue. So, which is why I spoke a little bit about the Personal Data Protection Bill, which is still in discussion and has been benched. So, we need to see how that is being handled, because there's no law right now that explicitly governs such acts. It's a gray area for now, because it's a legitimate mechanism, the last seen option online or whatever it is. But at the same time, if someone were to do it offline, then it would be stalking. So where do you draw the line, and how do you deal with this clash? So that is something I think hopefully is addressed through the privacy bill that is still in the works.
All right, thank you for that. Another question by Prasanta is, what is the substitute of Section 66A of IT Act? After the struck down of the section in Shreya Singhal case, some are misusing the excuse and circulating, defaming and stalking online. I think we responded to it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to skip that question. If any international person commits crime, is there any provision for them? Person from outside of India. Do we have any provision for them in our laws?
The IT Act, read with CRPC, has cross-border jurisdiction available. So even if a crime is committed by an international person, so say by a foreigner or an NRI in India, there will be jurisdiction. If a crime is committed by an Indian on an outside soil, so outside the jurisdiction of India, still there will be jurisdiction to the Indian courts or to the criminal courts in India to try that offense. So this international or cross-border jurisdiction is available. MLATs are and letter rogatories are not in terms of, because I can see a question popping up. MLATs and letter rogatories are ways and means where you can ask for information or get the person extradited within the country. That is not about jurisdiction or applicability of law in terms of cross-border crimes. Those are two different things.
Yeah, I think I think Section 3 also talks about extraterritorial jurisdiction. At what Vaishali mentioned, I think exactly precisely that covers it. And any foreigner, even if he cannot take a plea and say, I was not aware of this particular law in India when I'm coming here. And we have seen some cases in the past where the foreigners coming here and joining the parties here or the offsites and all. And we have seen or heard the foreigners or the expats, in fact, committing the sexual harassment in the offsites. I think in such cases, they say, no, I have seen one case where the foreigner is saying, no, this law of the land is not applicable to us. Whoever commits in India and he commits something wrong here, some criminal act here, that law would be, the law of the land would be applicable to him, or it would be, the action can be taken against him. Not only this, but when an Indian going outside the country and committing some act there, a criminal act, in that case also, in that case also, in India again, we have the jurisdiction. We can again initiate the action again in the criminal law.
So what about the online thing? Like, somebody sitting in India is committing a crime against somebody sitting in outside of country. So when we land, we understand law of the land, as you rightly said, said right now. But what if we are like virtually doing it? So which law of the land will apply?
So the jurisdiction is limitless. The classic case is, I think, the ongoing case of Faraj Kundra. If you see, he himself is a British citizen. And his brother-in-law's name also cropped in as far as the High Court judgment is concerned. That is also coming up. So I think he's sitting there. He's using he's using the server which is located in London for his activities in India. I think all those things will definitely matter, and still it will be covered. As far as Indian law is concerned, the action definitely can be taken against him.
Awesome. I think one question by Suchitra is, when in an IC inquiry, a witness gets a call from a victim and he calls the and he takes a call on the speaker without informing victim, and she uses derogatory terms. How she is going to see that Mr. A learns a lesson due to the case she has made. Is this conversation acceptable? Suchitra, I didn't get the question. Is this conversation acceptable to be taken by IC when she has asked about this during her session with the same witness? You'll have to explain that. I'm so sorry, I couldn't make out what the question is.
Thank you, Smita. I just wanted to know, would that be applicable in the sense that the IC comes to a decision, because after they have a session with her and the witness, where the IC tells her that this was the conversation we heard over the phone on the speaker, and she doesn't say yes, nor does she say no, but it can affect the IC taking a decision that it was planned by her to take action or to raise a case again of sexual harassment against the perpetrator, whom she says that he's a perpetrator. So is that acceptable? Because you mentioned criminal court, you cannot accept this, and so I wanted to know what would you do as an IC member.
You want me to answer that, Smita?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So, Suchitra, coming to a very specific question that you've asked. Now, if there is a conversation going on a speakerphone, the question would be, is that conversation being recorded and then produced before the IC? Now, if that conversation was recorded and produced before the IC, what I said earlier applies as it is. First, you will have to confront the person whose voice is being alleged, saying that, is it your voice and did you say all this? Only if the conversation is admitted by that person, then it is admissible and you can rely on it. If the person says, no, I did not say this, this is not my voice, it's not that you don't have any recourse, it's just a more time-consuming recourse that you need to put it through a forensic analysis. There are no shortcuts to that. The third way of doing it is, sometimes even when the witness denies it, if you have a good way of cross-examining the witness, you may have enough circumstantial evidence to give a conclusion. But on your own, you cannot just, in a way, high-handedly, if I can use the word, rely on an audio conversation which has not passed the test of evidence. As far as IC cases are concerned, sometimes, we tend to get away with it. But if that is a question before an appellate court, that will fail the test of evidence.
So this was not recorded. He received a call while he was in an inquiry. The witness was in the inquiry with the IC committee members, and he took the call and he put it on the speaker. So no permission was taken either from the IC members whether I can take the call, nor was the permission taken from the so-called victim who had called him, because she was aware that he was there with the IC as a witness. So I was wondering on the law technicalities of it, that yes, she said she's so and so. He asked in front of us, and so we know that her identity is there, and also she was asked to sit in a session with the witness, and it was mentioned by the IC members that yes, we heard the call because he had put it on the speaker, and she did not deny it, nor did she agree to it.
I know it's actually a tricky situation, but an IC member cannot be a witness. You are a judge, right? So you cannot be a witness you cannot have dual responsibility. So as IC members, actually you should have told her that call is being heard by all IC members rather than just keeping quiet. I'm sorry, maybe this is too personal in terms of the discussion now, because it's a real case perhaps you're discussing.
Yeah.
But your role is that of an independent inquiry officer.
Yes.
Independent inquiry officers cannot become part of the inquiry itself by becoming witnesses.
Yes. And we had to ask him to shut that thing off, and we said it loudly enough.
Which means you
But
cannot rely on it
happens
because you
so
cannot have
quickly.
a dual role.
But it can be challenged. This particular incident, if it is quoted, that this is what we heard, she was not aware of it, but it happened in a jiffy, and we heard this. And of course, we confronted that with her along with the witness.
That can't be relied on. That can't be relied on because that is against her principles of natural justice, which is her right.
Okay, thank you.
I think we've covered all the questions. I think it was a wonderful discussion. It was so much of information for me too, because for me, this is quite an alien law, though it is parallel and we use it in IC, in POSH conversations. Yeah, but too much of information today. Thank you very much, because I'll take some time to mull over it, chew it, and absorb it. I'm sure the team members who joined, the participants who joined also had a great time. We will be circulating some do's and don'ts or some posters across, and also the recording once we finalize in a day or two to the entire set of participants. If there are any more questions, please send it to info@kelphr.com. Please like us on our LinkedIn page, because we keep doing all these sessions, and we could really share a lot of inputs there. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, panel members. I mean, y'all were delight to have. I mean, I have learned so much, so much. And it's always, y'all are coming for the second, all three of you have a repeat conversation for all three. And this is the first time we are having a repeat set of people. And it is pleasure to have you. I don't have words, actually. I'm so overwhelmed. Thank you so much. Any closing comments, any closing thoughts each one of you want to add here?
I think I should say that I also felt like I was part of the audience today, because I just learned so much from both Ms. Vaishali and Mr. Rajkumar, and your case studies threw up some very interesting, brainstorming sessions that we had. And I think it was a very insightful session for me. And I feel like we could keep talking about this topic for a lot more time, but given our time constraint, we had to bring this to a session. So I just like to thank all of you for being so patient, and also the audience. I think we had some very interesting questions also that were thrown up. So looking forward to more such fruitful discussions from KELP HR. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Smita, for this opportunity. It's always a pleasure to be with you and this wonderful audience who's so invested in the subject, and all your case studies that also put us in a fix. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Smita. I think you always, put your 100% whenever you conduct these kind of events. You, in fact, took a lot of pains to get two such eminent panelists for this discussion. I think it was very interesting to learn so many new things during the discussion. It's wonderful. Thank you so much once again. And also, I think the audience for asking the relevant and very brilliant questions. I think I can say the practical questions, what they encountered or faced in the past. I think they got the answers. I think that is what I feel.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
I can see a lot of thank you messages on the group, on this chat also. Have a lovely evening ahead. Take care of yourself. Yeah, all of you. Good evening.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye.